You think these statues were built to worship ancestors? Wrong. In reality, they were part of the most insane status competition in history. 800 years ago, chiefs on this isolated island started playing a game. Whoever had the biggest stone statue was the boss. You build a 3-meter statue, I'll build a 5-meter one to outdo you. You build a 10-ton statue, I'll build a 50-ton one to shut you up. The game became more and more extreme. The statues grew larger, the trees became fewer, and eventually the entire island turned into a barren wasteland. This island is called Easter Island. It lies more than 2,000 kilometers from the nearest landmass, making it one of the most isolated places on Earth. 800 years ago, a group of Polynesians crossed the ocean and discovered it. At that time, the island was covered with forests and filled with birds and animals. It was practically paradise. A group of fewer than 100 people quickly grew into a population of 15,000. But that's when the trouble began. These people believed in something called mana, spiritual power. They believed that deceased chiefs possessed mana and could ensure abundant harvests, so people began carving stone statues for dead chiefs. These were the Moai. The earliest Moai were only about the height of a person. They were simple and mainly served as memorials. But over the following decades, things started to change. One year, there was an exceptionally good harvest. As soon as the news spread, everyone went crazy. If statues could bring spiritual power, then build more of them. Soon, 11 tribes were competing fiercely. You build one statue, I'll build two. You build a 3-meter statue, I'll build a 5-meter one. This was no longer about faith. It had become a naked power game. Whoever had the biggest statue could claim that their god was more powerful and gain an advantage when distributing food and resources. Creating these statues was already insane. They were carved from volcanic tuff at the Reno Raraku volcano. Workers chipped away with stone tools, carving the statue face up while it was still attached to the rock, then moving it to a slope, standing it upright, and finishing the back. One statue could take months or even years to complete. Even crazier was the transportation. These stones often weighed dozens of tons and had to be moved several kilometers to the coast. How? The answer is astonishing. They walked them there. Islanders tied ropes around the statue's head and sides. 20 or 30 people pulled together, causing the statue to sway from side to side like a penguin until it reached its destination. Sounds clever, right? But the cost was enormous. Making a statue walk required huge amounts of rope. Rope required tree bark. Trees also had to be cut down for rollers, supports, and various tools. By the 14th century, when the civilization reached its peak, the population had grown to 15,000. Even worse was the population problem. 15,000 people needed food. The workers building and transporting statues needed even more food. To grow enough crops, more land had to be cleared. That meant cutting down even more trees. Thus began a death spiral. The statues became larger and larger, consuming more and more resources. From the original 3 meters, they grew to 5 meters, 10 meters, and 15 meters. The largest, completed Moai, stood 10 meters tall and weighed 82 tons. The giant Moai that was never completed was designed to be 21 meters tall and weigh 150 tons. The equivalent of about 30 elephants combined. Imagine the scene. When a chief ordered the construction of this unprecedented giant statue, everyone knew what it meant. How many trees would need to be cut down? How many people would need to be mobilized? How many resources would be consumed? Yet no one dared oppose it, because in this competition, whoever stopped first was considered weak. Their tribe would be marginalized and eventually starve. This was the most terrifying kind of prisoner's dilemma. Everyone knew they were heading toward disaster, but no one dared stop first. Then the moment finally arrived. When the last tree capable of being used for building canoes fell, the fate of the entire civilization was sealed. Without trees, they could no longer build ocean-going canoes. Without canoes, they could no longer catch dolphins and tuna, their main sources of protein. Without forests, sea winds carried salt spray onto farmland. Crop yields collapsed. The soil began to erode. Fresh water became increasingly scarce. Everyone knew it was over. No trees meant no boats meant no fish. The entire island would starve. But guess what the chiefs were doing? They were still competing to build a super statue weighing 150 tons and standing 21 meters tall. The result was predictable. The population began to collapse. From a peak of 15,000 people, it fell to just 3,000 within about a century. Famine broke out. Tribes began fighting one another. Crude obsidian spearheads were scattered everywhere. Skeletons found at Poik show signs of severe blows to the head and face. Even more horrifying, people began eating each other. Settlements were abandoned. Survivors hid in caves, barely surviving through cannibalism. Most terrifying of all, even when only 3,000 starving survivors remained, not a single chief was willing to admit defeat first. But even the most stubborn beliefs cannot withstand reality forever. As the giant statues toppled one by one, as the chiefs became too hungry even to stand, the worship of the Moai finally collapsed. Those statues displayed no divine power. They simply stood there cold and silent, as if mocking the entire tragedy. A new belief system emerged, the Birdman cult. Its rules were even crazier. Every year, a competition was held. Young men had to leap from a 250-meter cliff, swim to a small offshore island, and retrieve the egg of a seabird. The chief, whose champion returned first, would rule the entire island for a year. Countless people fell to their deaths, drowned, or were killed by sharks. But nobody cared. It was the last remaining way to prove the existence of mana. On Easter Day in 1722, Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen became the first European to set foot on the island. That is why it became known as Easter Island. What did he see? 2,000 or 3,000 impoverished islanders, rows of toppled giant statues, and barren hillsides stripped of trees. He could not imagine how these people had ever managed to build such stone giants. 50 years later, when British explorer Cook arrived, even more Moai had been toppled. By the 1860s, except for those partially buried on volcanic slopes, not a single Moai remained standing. But the disaster was not over. In the 1860s, Peruvian slave traders arrived. Within just a few months, they abducted 1,500 people. Under international pressure, the captives were returned, but they brought back smallpox, tuberculosis, and disease. In the end, only 111 Rapa Nui people remained on the island. Today, when we stand on Easter Island and look at the restored Moai statues, it is difficult not to wonder, can humanity truly learn from history? 800 years ago, the chiefs knew that cutting down every tree would bring catastrophe. But for prestige, for power, and for that invisible thing called mana, they chose to gamble until the very end. And today, do we really have the right to laugh at them?